Here's a cool thing. So I have people always say you got to go back to like what you liked as a kid, right? To see, think about what you should really be doing. And I actually have a picture. It's in my parents' place or whatever now. So I should probably go get it at some point, but it was a little picture I probably drew when I was 6 or something. And it was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you want to do? And I had like a really ugly face, a really poorly drawn picture of myself in the middle. And then on each side, I had four things. And one was basically, uh, I want to do math. I want to be able to do math. I want to do writing. I want to be good with sort of digital stuff. And then I want to learn, the cool one was I want to learn how the city was made, right? That was actually the thing I said. And believe it or not, that is kind of what I've done.
All right. Thanks for joining us at the Life of a Career podcast, Jason. Can you give us a quick 90 seconds of who you are and what you do?
Sure, Eric, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, and my story is a little interesting for people who are trying to figure out their career. I'll give it really quick. So I started out, I'll go to my whole history, but I ended up going to law school. I had a really deep interest in real estate and development, ended up around the world in different places, trying to figure out what works where and do this and do international law and development. And I moved from that into more of a consulting and, consulting world and did that still do that, and then now I've recently started up a business to help companies get clients and develop their strategies in sort of the new commercial world we're entering. So that's kind of the story. It's sort of law to consulting to now entrepreneurship. Although it's kind of been that all the way.
Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later to figure out what you do on a day-to-day basis. So before we get there, could you kind of walk us through a little bit of like, is this what you always wanted to do as a kid? Did you know that this job existed?
Here's a cool thing. So I have people always say you got to go back to like what you liked as a kid, right? To see, think about what you should really be doing. And I actually have a picture. It's in my parents' place or whatever now. So I should probably go get it at some point, but it was a little picture I probably drew when I was 6 or something. And it was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you want to do? And I had like a really ugly face, a really poorly drawn picture of myself in the middle. And then on each side, I had four things. And one was basically, uh, I want to do math. I want to be able to do math. I want to do writing. I want to be good with sort of digital stuff. And then I want to learn, the cool one was I want to learn how the city was made, right? That was actually the thing I said. And believe it or not, that is kind of what I've done, right? The legal world that I was in, the consulting world, it's all about why did this happen? Why is LA where it is? Why is St. Louis where it is? Why is Beijing where it is? Why is Taipei where it is? And then what industries form? Like what in, the whole history, and you go throughout all of history. And so part of the reason I ended up leaving law, even though that was where I really got the sense of how we actually do the nitty gritty of it today, how we actually make things now. It's just a bit of a deeper, older, broader interest. And so I flowed from there into the consulting with people and companies trying to figure those things out. And it's been a real key part of it, but I wouldn't say it was like exactly what you want. You're always updating what it is you want, but you got to remember those threads from early on.
That's so interesting that you had those specific interests though, because as a kid, why weren't you, most kids are probably not thinking, I want to know how a city is built. They may be more interested in like video games or different TV shows or something like that. What do you know what it was that made you interested in all of these subjects like math and how a city was built?
Yeah, I think one way I like to think about it is I was just sort of thinking about what are the core areas I like to. It's basically communication, numbers, um, technology, and then urban civilization. I don't know, civilization, something like that, cities, stuff like that. And I don't know. I mean, it's really like those were the deep interests that I had. And they kind of continue. I think even people playing video games, what kind of games are you playing? What stuff obsesses you? Um, I played all sorts of video games, so I wasn't just like a total nerd. Like I played all sorts of first person shooters and everything. But it's, often you need to talk with people, like say, hey, bounce ideas off of people. Like, what do I really like? Ask your friends. What do you always talk about? And even within the things you like, there's more there than you realize. It's kind of like in relationships. You realize, oh, I really love this person. I really like this good friend of mine. And you think about, why do I like him? It's like, well, he's so funny. He's this and that. But then you're like, oh, he's got this great demeanor. He's always optimistic. He makes me feel like I'm, incredibly worth being around and smart or whatever it is. And there's always something like that in the things you like. And you can pull those threads forward. And today you have to find and often make the niche that fits you. So the more you have a sense of who you are in a deep way and go all the way back to your history, the better.
Did you have any help from like your friends or your parents or your community in general that might have influenced you in being able to dial that in? Because I think a lot of people may not really know who they are. I think in a way,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly who I am yet either. So it's
Yeah.
fascinating that you knew at such a young age, like what contributed to that.
Well, I fell off the path all sorts of times. You get distracted. It's not like I was just right on the path the whole way, but that's also part of the journey. That's the way it happens, right? You're kind of like a snake. You're kind of slithering. You're kind of like jutting side to side, but moving forward a little bit. And I think one of the things that I always tell people is you got to ask. Ask people who you are. Ask for help. Ask what they see. You don't even have to. It's often just like, what do you see in me? Like, what am I doing? What does it look like? And when you're young, you often don't realize how much older people really see. They see the young, striving kid at the bar trying to, you know, get a sense of confidence, to have a good time and talk to the people he wants to talk to, or someone eager at a new job, looking to have the right impression. I mean, all these things are really visible to older people. If you come to them with good faith and the right intention, people are really willing to help. And also people love to just you know transfer their wisdom, or kind of give constructive feedback, or commentary on who people are. It's really, I mean, especially as you get older, people want to have kids impart all their knowledge and wisdom. So that's a real struggle too. When you're young, you're like, I'm new, I'm part of this new revolutionary generation, and da 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 da. And so you got to always balance how much you want that, be part of that energetic youth, have to really harness that energy, and then also respect the tradition. I'll actually give a quick thing. I did get really lucky. When I was in high school, I ended up doing vision research and some psychological research, with a guy who was, God, he was 60 years older than me. So he was my grandparents' generation. And he was someone who always really believed in me. And he even gave me this really powerful and constructive perspective, where he gave me the perspective on my parents from someone who had children their age. Do you know what I mean? So that
Mhm.
was just like, whoa. Like when you're a kid, you're like, your whole world revolves around your parents and you're trying to, balance it. So I had this perspective that was very constructive for me, and it gave me perspective on my parents, and it, helped build that communication channel with all sorts of people.
How did you find that person who
The internet.
helped the internet?
It was the internet, man. I'll be honest, it was just the internet.
Did you
Uh,
just reach out to them or did you read
yeah, I
some
reached
literature
out.
from them and then you just reached
Well,
out?
yeah, so I read some stuff online, but then I just reached out, and he actually happened to live nearby. I'm pretty sure I just walked over. That's another thing. A really, really important thing. Especially when we're young. It really starts, I feel like, in middle school. So that's like what, 11, 12 to 16, 15, something like that. That's when we withdraw into ourselves. We're trying to figure out who we are. And we're often too insecure, or we lack the confidence to approach people. And in particular, to approach people with a sense of vulnerability that makes you seem human. We come out trying to be like this tough guy or something. It's just like, it's farcical to the older people. But yeah, I mean, that's a really another key skill when you're asking for help or wanting to communicate with people, when you can just, you know, they see more of you than we want to admit anyway. Right. And so just to be humble enough to be, all right, I know you see I'm like a whack little kid here. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm lost. I got some potential, a very rough diamond here. Let's see what we can do. And I think that's also something when you're in the business world and you have to get clients, and you have to hire talent. You have to retain people. You have to do all these things, this willingness to step forward with a bit of courage, good faith, a bit of humbleness, and and a smile, and really good things happen. And we have to work past that. We develop a scaly exterior. You know what I mean? I think, particularly young guys, uh, it's worth shedding that eventually.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's very true. I had that before this podcast. We were talking about how I wanted to join the military, and I think to a small degree, it's because of that. I wanted to create that hard
mm,
exterior, right? To say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm tough. And then eventually that goes away. You're absolutely correct. As you get older, you start thinking back, like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. The whole
yeah,
tough shell and all of that.
there's really great value. I'll give you guys, so guys who know a bit about me, I have a whole bit of a China expert of a book on this country and all that. And that's a lot of what the consulting I do does. But there's a great historical fact, people, that's really useful because everyone wants it. We all want to be tough. We want to be seen as tough and powerful and all that. And it's actually ancient China where we got all the martial traditions in the world. They developed in northern China around a really, really brutal, violent piece of the world, probably the bloodiest place on earth in civilized history, because there's just so much relentless conflict there. And what developed around the edge of this area were all of the martial traditions that led to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and Krav Maga and all this and judo and all. They all really, the core ones formed in this area. And it's very interesting because the key, and I was very into martial arts. I did taekwondo, I did wrestling, I did all this stuff. And the key thing is whenever you're trying to find the hard exterior, and some of the wisdom I got from China, and this is, it's actually the people who really have it. They actually don't show it in the same way. And I'm sure if you're in the military, the guys who are really really tough and know it, it's a sort of inner confidence that comes from, well, believing in yourself and knowing you've done the work, and that sort of thing. And it's really interesting. I always recommend guys, again, particularly guys, because this is more of a male thing, maybe. The martial stuff is really good, and the military is very useful for a lot of people. It pulls people out, gives them discipline. Some people go there on a spiritual journey. Actually, you might have seen some of those guys, trying to just remove whatever was in them in high school. Uh, but I really do think that the ancient Chinese thing is eventually you merge that martial with the spiritual, and you end up with people who are very grounded, and they actually very rarely are violent or very rarely attempting to put on a front of this ridiculous, tough guy thing.
Yeah, and I can relate to that because we used to have a joke, or we still sort of do have a joke as veterans. It's like, you know, the person who looks most like a hippie after they get out of the military, they were probably the operators. And then the ones who
Yeah,
walk away and retire with high end tights and still maintain that for the rest of their lives, they probably were not the ones who were, you know, the
support.
badasses of the world, right? They were just trying to maintain some level of persona. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
I completely agree with you on that. Um, Kind of going back to the your career, the how did you then immediately after high school decide I want to become a lawyer and then started that trajectory, or what was the path there into college?
yeah, great question. So for me, I ended up doing some college stuff in high school, and I was really looking for intellectual freedom. Right? I think that was probably the main thing. I was saying, I was doing the research. Went to a good university and did courses even in college. I mean, in high school, but I really wanted a sense of intellectual freedom. I ended up going to Berkeley, where I could basically take all the courses that I wanted. I didn't have to do. You got a lot of freedom what you want to do, and I was overwhelmed by wanting to do. I just took for 2 years. I basically just took courses in almost everything, and then I had to really figure out what is like. We need to educate ourselves. So this is a really key thing for anybody trying to figure out what your career is. Career is great, but you always, always, always need to be learning. And unfortunately, these days, there's like a weird thing where we go into high school and we're supposed to be learning, but we're really preparing for college to get a job. And then we're often like, I kind of lost that there, but the gist of it is we're doing career stuff and we're doing learning stuff, and we're not really doing either very well. Like we're in college and we're supposed to be learning, but really just trying to get a job. or we're, on the job and we're working, but we really should be learning to develop new skills to be able to do more. And so I always recommend people try and really develop their own learning program. I know this is so difficult. And this is also where talking to people, mentors, coaches, anything like that is really useful, because you gain a lot of confidence by learning, like saying, oh, I can learn this. I can learn physics. I can learn math. I can learn to communicate. I can learn to debate. It really is a very empowering thing. And it's also developing all these really useful things that you're going to do all the time. And so I went to college, and I was actually not really focused on the career at that point. I was just trying to figure out how to learn, what I wanted to learn, what sequence and all that. And I ended up focusing on the communication thing. So I ended up doing rhetoric, which was the major, which is basically about reading, writing, speaking, argument, and argument in all these areas. So science, it can be quantitative, it can be qualitative, it can be science, it can be religious, it can be historical. It's like, how are these arguments played out, right? And also, what are the emotional elements to it? What's the technological stuff? Where's the marketing? And it was really cool because it was not like, obviously I'm like drawn to philosophy and stuff like that, but it's like, when you hear the word rhetoric these days, it's usually because someone is saying something crazy. He's like inflaming an entire ethnic group or preparing, that kind of thing. And then also the other side of it is this world of marketing and advertising that we live in. I mean, what is this world? How do we actually understand it? Which is really, in a lot of ways, this world of commercial suggestion that we live in is a dominant influence in our whole psychology and all this. And so that's kind of where I started. I wanted to be able to piece together my own learning program. And then after 2.5 years, I decided to do law, and that was kind of how that happened. And yeah, parallel to that was this real focus on development, right? So I wanted to learn the communication stuff, but I was fixated. I was working actually with a developer and all that kind of stuff in college, and yeah, and so I was really exploring, like, how do I understand this world of development? Like, what do I do? Do you work with private companies? Do you look at history? Do you look at industries? It's just I'm always drawn to these very complex areas where there's not exactly like a linear thing to understand. You have to understand from all these different angles. And so my look at learning and my understanding of even people's careers is kind of influenced by that.
Did you how did you build that habit of asking people for help? Like, let's say you're in college, you just decided I'm
I
going to
suck
take
at it, man. I sucked at it in college. That's the truth. This is me trying to help anyone else who's listening. It's like, I didn't do that enough. I was too proud. I really was. And I think, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's just because the truth is I wasn't. I'm not going to pretend like I was. But it's really, I mean, it's real questions about managing your own emotions and our pride and our desire for success and individual achievement. I think one thing I really felt, especially when I went to college, is I was like, it's a very American thing. All right, goodbye, parents. Goodbye, old friends. I'm going to do all this on my own. I'm going to do everything. And you're sitting there, you're like, you don't know what to learn. You don't know what you want to do. You don't know what jobs are available. You don't really have a good read on your own skills. You're not very biased. You don't even know what you can learn yet. You don't know what you're finding an aptitude for at a higher level. So it's madness in a way. So I really think the place to start is always with your friends, your close friends. I mean, this is the practice I developed in my mid-20s. You just improve the quality of the communication with your friends. I mean, that's the place to start, and you build out more and more authentic um, and useful uh, conversations. Basically, right? You ask. So let's say we were really good friends. I'd be like, "Hey, Eric, I got this problem." To use you as a sounding board, it's like, are my motivations honest? What unconsciously, do I really want to do this thing, or do you think I just want to get laid with that pretty girl, right? Or yeah, and really doing these processes or asking, yeah, I mean stuff like that is really useful, and you start to see when you develop more and more well-rounded and productive relationships, people start bringing things to you, and I mean, it's a whole thing. It's a whole it's a whole process, man. I mean, it's really something we should be learning, but we're all again, we have that hard exterior. We're caught up in ourselves, and that's for later levels. But really, you just start. You go with an open heart. You be humble, good faith, a little bit of courage, and you just try. I mean, it's like, honestly, it's like, for men again, it's like, just go talk to the girl. Just say hi, please. Don't get all caught up in your head. and sit there. Like that's also a decision to not do anything, and you know, it's the same, man.
Yeah, that's it's it's so insightful. The way that you broke this down of just talking to people and actually just being deliberate with it. I think a lot of people are not that open to just go, "Hey, tell me about what you think of me in this decision," and truly get that feedback. Um, how are you so open to receiving that feedback? Because sometimes that feedback isn't going to be what you want, right? Or what you think you want.
Yeah, I think it's I learned it's much worse to not get that feedback and to kind of it pulls you away from reality. I think on a deep level what we're talking about is the value of actually being as in touch with reality as possible, you know? And I think for people who have their own business or even just in a working in the business world, you don't want to think, oh, or like let's say you're in sales. It's like you don't want to be like, oh, that was a great call. I totally killed it and da 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 da. And maybe you have a recording at your company and a coworker is like, dude, you were just going off. She was just indulging it and waiting to get off the phone, you know? And it just that the feedback's always brutal, but the the value once you start, you kind of get the snowball going and you're like, "Oh, I'm improving. I'm making this progress." It really probably comes down to a bit of loving learning in a sense and having some faith that your relationships will be okay. Often we want to go into the same thing with our friends because we don't want to shake the boat. Even though there's someone we're very close to, we're somehow still nervous that maybe if I reveal this part of myself, they're gone, or this will be closed off. And I'll tell you something I learned very important. Whenever you expose, and also it's funny, Sequoia Capital, if anybody's familiar with the venture capital world, probably the best venture capital firm ever, at least in the last 50 years. It's a tactic and they use to bond partners and people together. And the gist of it is basically whenever you reveal something about yourself that's private and personal to someone and they don't take advantage of it, your brain assumes they're basically that they're part of the tribe, right? And so you have to take that step, the classic leap of faith. You can't, if you do that, often what happens is they'll do the same thing. And you get these, layers of disclosure. And I know I'm using sort of a lot of language related to sort of intimacy and disclosure and all this because this is kind of the key thing when you're trying to figure out who you are and what you should be doing. And you want to improve your vision of what you want to be doing over time. And you want to be able to work with people and you want to see where you're wrong. This is the way it happens, I
Hmm.
think.
Yeah, no, I love the detail in which you're providing, because it's the you're peeling back the onions of and showing the actual, uh, you know, principles behind it, and the framework of how we operate. And yeah, that's super interesting. I'm gonna have to watch this back just to hear it over again too, to reflect on this. uh, but so then you went into law school, right? And what were your intentions there? And then what happened after law school?
Yeah, so I focused. Law school was a good experience in some ways, and not the best in others. My focus was it was the combination of basically the communication thing that I focused on before, and then the city thing. So from the beginning, I was there. I was taking development courses, land use, real estate. It's like why are things laid out the way they are? That's also what I specialized in when I was working at a law firm. So I went with a pretty deliberate intention. But here's a key thing people got to realize the tracked careers, whether you're going to medicine or law or investment banking or whatever it is. Let's use investment banking because it's familiar and it's lucrative and a lot of people go into it, or consulting, do the same thing. You go in there and you're like, all right, I like finance. I want to make a name for myself. I want to work on impactful projects, all this kind of stuff. And that's really good. But the career has a very specific vision of where you can go, you know, and there's a timeline that they have and there's a process that they have. And if you're going into careers like this, you always got to realize what your goals are and what your vision is. Because what often happens is the vision of the profession or the vision of the firm or the vision of the company or whatever um, takes over, right? And we have a lot of lawyers and we have a lot of doctors and we have a lot of bankers and consultants and all that stuff. So the key thing that you can provide is to be the you version of this, right? Even if you're staying within it, you want to be, you want to bring the things that brought you to it and you want to find the area where you most fit, right? You're often trying to find a combination of personality and professional fit, right? If that makes sense. There's more to it,
Yeah.
but that's kind of the gist of it. And yeah, I mean, I just think it is so important. And for me, I always had the sense that I knew what I was in law school for. I knew what I was in law firms for, and I also had a strong sense of what I could do if I stayed in that world. Um, but I wanted other things, and so that was kind of what naturally led me after a while out of it. And I can say that I probably had a sense of that even beforehand. And if I went back, I would question a lot of my uh, decisions in certain respects. But the key to making the right decisions is typically just to find out what you want to do. And the best advice now is instead of doing a lot of the schooling, just experiment, just try, just go, just copy someone who looks like they're doing it and then fail and then try again and get feedback. I mean, this is the key thing for me. And I think for a lot of people, we have that hard exterior. We're like, yeah, I'm tough. And yeah, I know what I'm doing. And you're acting confident and all this. And you go home and now you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea to do any of that. And the key, to get rid of that is to get feedback. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing when we're talking about how to talk to friends, just to start it, get feedback. And if you have a partner, a girlfriend or whatever, this is the deeper version of that. You want feedback on everything. And so you want, if people are looking to improve that aspect of their lives, you you are actually pulling a lot of processes in from what you're doing to discuss with friends. There's more to that because it's a different thing, but that's this is that process of getting feedback. And if you're looking for what you want to do, you get feedback. And I think really valuing that feedback, it's ask your question, like how do you accept it? Because that feedback is helping put you on your path. It's helping you discover what you're not thinking about properly. It's helping you discover um, more about yourself, more about the world, and it's helping to align you in the world and what you're going to do in it. So loving learning and loving feedback in that way. I mean, that's kind of real learning in a lot of ways. A lot of college and I did a lot of schooling and stuff, but schooling isn't as important. Like I said, like the learning is very important. You guys, I mean, these days, anyone who's under 25, I mean, you can go learn anything you want to learn. Then the question is like, how do you actually execute on it, right? Everyone's had this. Oh, I'm going to take this great course, and then it's just like boom, like you lasted like a week. But you can tie in learning with your vision, with your goals, with what you're doing. Then you can really have some sustained discipline, some sustained activity, and ultimately achievement with it.
Was there some sort of feedback that you received that changed your course then when you were doing the land use attorney positions, like that sort of steered you away? Because at some point you landed at China expert and also the other business consulting side. What happened there?
Sure. So I first went to China twice. I went to China a bunch of times between 2010 and 2015. I got a scholarship to study there and all this stuff. So that had been a strong trend. And again, it gets back to what I said before. I wanted to see learn how the city was made. And while I was growing up in the 90s, China was literally building over 600 major cities. And so it always captured my imagination, right? And I was reading ancient Chinese books and stuff when I was in like 10, less than 10. So that had always been there. And yeah, the person who gave me the feedback was actually an ex-girlfriend of mine, right? Where it was the same thing. And it was sort of like, well, is this what you want to do? Right? It forced those questions. And then, yeah, and then that's literally what it was. I mean, it was that sort of, that same dynamic. A bit more contentious at the time, but that was what's going on.
How did you go from receiving that feedback to course correcting then? Um, did you go get another job somewhere else outside of the land use attorney industry? I mean, that must have been pretty terrifying because of your educational background, the investment that you did there to jump into something completely different. If
Yeah,
that's
sure. So I was working on a lot of legal consulting stuff on the side where I was able to fund a lot of what I was doing. And then what's interesting is that the land use stuff that I did, I mean, another part of this, very first course I took in college actually was a geography course. And it was geography in a very different way. So I typically say land use or whatever, but if we wanted the full spectrum of what I do in the business consulting side, it's really a geographic view of national, historical, political, cultural, economic development, right? It's like, why did things end up where they did? Why is the United States so powerful? Why does China have recurring cycles of total or of authoritarian regimes and then utter chaos? Why does India just seem to be a churning place? The religious world is one of reincarnation. You're sort of sitting in the tropical sun and things kind of stay the way they are. And then it goes across there. So that was really the key thing. And so a lot of the land use stuff is a very technical thing applied to the United States and to the specific structure of our country and a few others. But it was broadened a lot by this. And so I have that background, and I pulled it from there. So I did a lot of writing, I did research, and then I also wrote a book, and I also worked with some clients from the job, right? So because it was actually sort of like the land use was like a part of the bigger thing, right? And so that's like the real answer to how the city was made is actually mostly a geographic sort of question, which is it's a combination of geography and technology and how they interface over time.
Okay, so when you left, it was sort of there was a transitional period that you were
Mm-hmm.
sort of doing both. You were just
Mm-hmm.
in both worlds, and then finally arriving to where you are now. What is like a day to day like for you then? Doing research? Are you working with clients? And how does that look in your, I guess, your profession or your
Yeah.
current endeavors?
Yeah, sure. So I have the business consulting stuff I do, which is sort of the view from 30,000 feet. All right, what's going on with industrial production in Europe, or what does it actually mean for the world with the conflict in Ukraine, blah 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 blah. It's basically the view from 30,000 feet. It's often like, does this make sense? Does this industry? Does this location? Does this workforce pattern? It's very economic in a lot of ways. That's cool. That's the view from 30,000 feet. And then everyone was just sort of like, okay, great. Do you have any, what do we wish we actually do? You know what I mean? And so this year I started up a business to answer that question, which provides a lot of modern growth strategies and stuff for companies and sort of stuff in that world. And so a lot of what I'm doing now is looking for different more business in different industries. So I was up in San Francisco last weekend, looking for a potential client in the aviation industry. So a lot of stuff like that. I still, oh, dude, I mean, I do a lot of things, and it's hectic. So there's podcast interviews, book revision stuff, articles, actual. I still do. I'm actually working with something that's quite legal right now. It's quite hectic, and so a lot of my uh, work in 2023 is actually be slimming things down, really focusing on certain things in certain periods, ramping certain things up, ramping certain things back. That's actually one of my goals. It's funny. This month is actually a rejuvenatory month. I last week I was doing like 6 different things in multiple places with multiple things with multiple parts of what I do, and it was too much. And so this month is actually about kind of rejuvenating and refocusing on things. But that's a sense of it. So work, consultations, writing, research, interviews, a lot of stuff like that. And then in the business world, there's always a sense of creating the value for the people you're partnering with. Marketing yourself, uh, opening conversations and closing sales, and making sure you give the value and everyone's satisfied, and then making sure all the finances work out. So anyone who's going to do a business, or I'm sure as anyone who wants to think about it, that's what there's always an underlying thread of I'm always doing that. And I will also say what's really important is making time for learning, even when you're um, you know health and truth are very important. I heard some venture capitalists saying that there's like uh, truth, health, and wealth are the 3 good things to focus on, and probably in that order. You know, where like we talked a lot about engaging with reality for what it is. That's really a truth practice. It will lead to wealth and probably better health. And then if you're just like drinking, shot after shot after shot and pretending like you're not in pain. And I think that's a relatively good model for people. And yeah, obviously, every day we focus on our careers, and this is a show about your career, but the quality of your career over time to make sure you don't end up in a small spot where you don't have any mobility, to make sure that you don't get kind of stuck into something that doesn't fit your personality, and to make sure that you keep growing and developing skills and can just on a deeper level add more to your family, to your company, to your society, to your city, to your civilization. Let's take it all the way to the top. Like, it's just to keep you got to keep learning. You got to stay healthy. So I refuse to let people forget that because it matters a lot.
How do you balance that research side and studying with your job? Is that when you identify it with a client that they have a problem set and then you go and study, or is it sort of happening in reverse where you have a domain expertise in something and then you're just sort of attracting that type of client who are seeking your domain expertise?
Gotcha. Yeah. So I spent over like 2.5 years basically taking the model that I developed and applying it, you know, flushing it out and then applying it to a really important case study. So I wrote a book on China that really lays out a lot of the stuff that I did. And I did a lot of research, obviously, during that period. So a lot of that is already contained. And often what it is, things will be related to current events, to problems that the clients have. And it's often tying current events into what's going on, checking to see if the model that I have is correct, adjusting things, seeing where there's gaps in information, seeing where there's nuances or complexities or there's more texture to what's going on than what the generalizations I was using, say. I mean, that's always something. We're always working at different levels of abstraction, right? And you're sometimes a client will be like, oh, I have X problem, and it's like you're like, all right, I'm like that's part of Y set of things, but it's like also it's X problem for them, and it's filled with all these particulars. Do you know what I mean? So there's sort of like different types of research, and so there's sort of the big macro stuff. I think that's very hard to do when you're really kind of working all the time. But when you're just more fitting things in, changes and stuff into something that's solid, that's kind of different, and that's typical. Like in the legal world, in the medical world, for example, you're often doing that, right? Because some patient comes in, client comes in, you have the body of knowledge, and then you're figuring out what applies and stuff like that, and you do more research to see if it's something novel, something like that. And I think, in a sense, I have that for the business consulting uh, side of things. And then what's very interesting about that is that it's really a combination of geography and technology, and so there's a lot of technological developments, demographic changes. So I'm going to get into this whole thing now, but like the demographic changes, industrial shifts, uh, political and cultural kind of revolutions going on right now that are make everything very dynamic. And so in a lot of ways, just being alive and being in touch with reality and taking in the news properly, it actually is feeding you naturally. And I think that that's kind of like an analogy could be, how we all want to have diets and we all are trying to look really good and be healthy. You can learn all these diets and then eventually you get to the place where you naturally listen to your body and the signals are all rewired properly and you can stay healthy, not by being very rigid, but actually by being, excuse me, flexible and dynamically responsive to the world as it is. In this case, your body and what it's telling you it needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really
Okay.
does. Um, just to respect your time because I know you have a pretty hard cutoff. What's uh what's like a you've already provided a lot of advice by the way. So I don't know if you have any left. It sounds like you do, but what
Probably.
would be the last thing that you would impart on a student or someone who's interested in your career, maybe even transitioning into this career? Um, what advice do you have for them?
Hmm. So for anyone kind of looking to find they're already kind of working and they're trying to make a shift, maybe my
Yeah,
thought, or
either find a career path or maybe even to do your career
to
path.
do what I do. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say one key thing is always to, well, first thing I'll say is that when you want to do things that require lots of knowledge, uh, you always want to start from what you know and kind of, if what you know is like a circle, you want to kind of pull in adjacent um, bodies of knowledge, right? So a great example could be, let's say for me, it involves like you have to know about, you know, industry, like various parts of industry, the Industrial Revolution. And you also have to know about agriculture. You have to know about population size. You have to know about demography. You have to know about all these things. It ends up being very, very crazy. Uh, and this is, again, there's complex, multidimensional areas of life that can be very complex. And to actually, how do you go about acquiring the knowledge that's necessary to understand the full issue when, for example, a university can't actually do it? You literally, there's too much in too many different areas and it's too siloed. And often in most companies, it's the same thing because it's this strong emphasis on specialization. So key thing is, again, focus on what you want to learn, what you're interested in, relentlessly learn it, and then also expand from what you know, right? So let's say you know a bit about um, the industrial. I'll just use industry for example, or no, even better one, agriculture. Agriculture is very complex. I grew up going to the Central Valley and actually picking stuff. My grandfather was an agricultural economist, and so I've always been very interested in it. And you learn, okay, well, the amount of food you can grow actually is the reason most countries are the population size they are. So then you're like, okay, the power, the strength of certain countries is directly dependent on the agriculture that they have, just in terms of pure scale. And then there's questions of like, oh, right, is it stable? Or do you go through booms and busts? Like, oh, do they have a large population that contracts and expands and contracts a lot? That's actually what you see in ancient, like Persia, modern Iran. You would see that. And in China, for example, it's a very high population, but it's very volatile historically, and so you get shifts around a band because the agriculture is very unstable. And then the point of this, again, this is specific knowledge that's odd in a lot of ways, but that actually leads directly to demography, right? Which is like, well, you have the number of people, then you have, okay, well, that really matters for wartime, you know war, basically. Like right now, Russia actually doesn't have the necessary population to maintain the war that it's fighting, right? And there's all these sorts of things. Um, and even more important in a world that's aging, the question of the population structure, right? The pyramid and where people are and where that's going, what that means for all these other things. Uh, it's very important. So your job is always going to tell you that you need to focus on one thing, but you actually want to do that thing well, but focus on all the other connections and slowly make your way into them. I think that's a great way to do it. In a lot of ways, to tell people to just learn a giant body of knowledge is too much. I think also you have to be gentle with yourself. It's like, all right, I'm not going to learn all of physics tomorrow, and let yourself, things are going to happen at their own rhythm, and know that they're going to happen, And I think it's also a very good practice for people. If you tried to learn piano as a kid and failed, it's good to eventually succeed at the things you said you would do, because it gives you that confidence, right? And even if things don't happen on your timeline, you want to have the confidence that they're going to happen. And I think that's a very valuable thing to do. I'd say for people who are doing something, curious about a career shift or something like what I did, yeah, I mean, start making things. I think this is the key. This is one of the great benefits of the world we live in. You can make podcasts, you can make videos, you can make all this stuff, and you will learn as you do, and you will get feedback as you do that. And the feedback can actually be very brutal in this context. It's different. What's funny is that we assume that, hey, if I asked you, Eric, something very personal about how I performed in this interview or this podcast, you'd actually be much nicer than if I asked the random anonymous YouTube crowd. So don't, get the good feedback in person and then steel yourself for the feedback online, right? But it's very valuable because you can learn a lot. You don't need to get economics degrees or law degrees or medical degrees or whatever. Like some of the most intelligent people in medicine, for example, are like really, really, really smart people who did like biochem or something in college, and then they're like super fitness people, super athletes. They have incredible knowledge, and they're actually often more knowledgeable than a lot of doctors who are forced to be in a small silo, right? You're either doing research or you're doing clinical practice, and you don't get this opportunity to have this really wide synthetic knowledge of things. So I'd also look for people like that. One last thing, everyone should admire people. You should find people that you like. A lot of people sometimes stop admiring people who are older than them when they're like in high school. Like a good friend of mine, he wanted to be a musician, and I asked him like, who does he admire? And he says, I don't even know, man. And he started talking about how he admired like Paul McCartney and the Beatles and people from back when he was in high school. And it's like, well, you're not going to become a rock god anymore. That's a different life now. But really finding people you admire and then trying to emulate a lot of their qualities, I think is really undervalued. We have a very imitative ape brain, and you want to have that working for you, right? I think that's a really powerful shortcut in a lot of ways. Find out who you admire. Let's say you admire some influencer or something, or some scientist who's very articulate. You're like, okay, I need to use words better. I need to be more precise. I need to be more specific. I need to be more nuanced in what I can observe and see. And you want to do that. Or you admire people who have one of those really, really impressive, like yogic senses of like, well-being. You look at them or hear them talking like, oh my God, like they probably just wake up with a sense of bliss and serenity. It's like, things you want to bring into your life and you see in others, give them their due in your brain, put them in your pantheon of gods, and try and you're almost going to naturally trend towards them, right? So you want to be trending towards, people. We do this, this is kind of back in the day. We used to have gods and we used to have like aristocrats, and we would naturally want to admire them and emulate them. People always emulated the king. They lived out the king's processes or whatever. That's all gone in America, and so we now have like celebrities and politicians, right? There's no longer gods and kings. It's celebrities and politicians. And these aren't good people to just naturally absorb what they're doing. You don't want to emulate these people. You want to be very specific and focused, just like you are with learning, just like you are with getting feedback from people, and just like you are in your relationships with who you admire, because they're actually going to be pulling you. They're going to it's literally like a string. Like the people you admire, the people who you feel like are high, or where you want to be in 3 years or where you want to be in 5 years, you're naturally going to head towards them. So you want to just make sure you're clear about who it is you're heading towards, or who you're trying to follow, really.
Yeah, no, I'm really going to watch this episode back several times because I think there's so much value to what you've been talking about. The deliberate nature of which you pursue almost everything that you've done, right? Interests, career. That's been the key factor of, I think, your success is how deliberate you were. I think a lot of people don't have that level of intention, and to have met you and seen a person who has that level of intention makes me realize like, oh, I may need to hone in on that focus as well. So really, really appreciate everything that you've kind of provide us today. Where can they reach you if they're interested in learning more about, I know you wrote a book. I'd like to read it. So could you just kind of, what's
Sure.
the book's name and website they can
Yeah.
find you?
So you can find just a personal website. It's jasonsheftel.net. I have a podcast that's about China. I'll probably be adding more stuff to. It's called China Unraveled. A YouTube channel where I'm increasingly doing more stuff. This is the challenge of, trying to share things with people and do all this other stuff. It's very complicated. And it's actually going to require help. That's also the key for 2023 too. It's like, helping getting things more delegated. But yeah, there's a YouTube channel. Just type in my name, Jason Szeftel. And the book, so the book I wrote that really pulled all this stuff together is originally called China Unraveled. That's where the podcast came from. When the pandemic hit, I had just finished the first draft of it, actually. And I decided, I wanted to share information as things closed down and this things that people in my world had known were coming started to happen. I wanted to share some information, so I have a cool podcast on that. What else? You can check me out on Twitter where I mouth off about things. Again, just look at my name, Jason Szeftel. It's probably on show notes or whatever. And yeah, you'll see that there. The book is cool. The book is really cool. It's called, the full title is China Unraveled: Order and Chaos in East Asia. It is doing a lot of things. One, it reconceptualizes Chinese history without the biases that China created to try and explain away aspects of its history, right? So we're going through a phase now where China's great authoritarian state, which is built up, is going to collapse. Spoiler alert, it's going to be really horrific. It's going to be probably at least an order of magnitude worse than what's going on in Ukraine. And people are going to need to understand what the hell just happened. How did we go from a place that was supposed to be the pinnacle of the future and all these things to what's coming and what's already, we can already see if people are aware of it. Yeah, and so that there's a lot into that. It's not so much about our personal, it's more of a big picture sort of book. It's as we talk, I feel like there's other things to write that are probably more immediately valuable to people. But what's cool about that is it's a book that can help people get a better grounding of history, wealth, power, questions that can really consume us if we don't get the right perspective, right? Whether it's questions of our ethnicity and what it means to be in a certain country, what ethnicity means, what it means to be Asian American in the United States, what it means to be African American in the United States, what it means, all these really core questions that have gotten very muddled and are being more muddled by our current politics for gain. It's valuable to clear certain things up. One thing I didn't mention earlier, I'll mention really quickly. One of the great benefits of truth, like we were talking about truth, health, and wealth, is it just clears things up. Like there's a lot of things that are just muddled in our head. And a great, when you learn what the physics of electricity is, it's like, okay, I get why these lights are doing. I get why something broke. When you understand how water moves in pipes, it clears a lot of things up. You understand why planes fly. And in the economic and political and social and cultural world, there are things like that. And very valuable to learn that just for clarity and to figure out what you want to do in your life and to focus on your vision. So there's that. And then, just anyone who wants to hear more talk or something, I'm, more open these days to giving people advice and stuff. I've been more focused on myself. So, reach out. You can find, email me, j. my last name at gmail.com. For people who actually really got value out of this, I think it's value. I mean, I do some coaching with people because it's hard to get coaches or mentors or to have people to believe in, you and certain things. But I don't have the most time for things. But reach out. I hope that was enough. So people can find me there. I will say that YouTube will have most cool stuff where I talk about things that might be useful to people, like going forward.
Great. Yeah. No, I really appreciate your time. I'm excited about going to your content now that I know it's a lot about the macro stuff, because I am really interested in that. So yeah, I can't wait I'm gonna jump off of this and probably just start looking at it. So yeah, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on the Life of a Career podcast.
Thanks, Eric. It was great. We should do it again too.
Hey, thanks for joining us at Mentor Access. If you like what you just watched, please click like and subscribe, and also hit that bell so that you get notified when we have new videos come out. Thank you for supporting our mission.